continuing conversations with educators about their experiences with this transition from face-to-face to a more online. I'm super excited to welcome Jeremy Wouda today from Hull. He's part of the Western Quebec School Board, and he's been teaching for about 10 years, and he's also been doing some online tutoring for a couple of years as well, which is particularly interesting for us in these pandemic times. So, nice to welcome you, Jeremy. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So, Jeremy, we'll rewind a little bit. And I just wanted to start talking a little bit about
Okay.
how things were going before March 13th when the pandemic shut everything down. What were you up to in your classes, and what were you kind of getting ready for?
Yeah. Before the world changed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it was quite interesting because we're obviously on terms in Quebec. So we had the 3 terms. So we had just finished up term 2. We'd had our mid-year. We'd counted that as a term 2 mark. So we were actually sitting on a pretty good bank of information from what our students were able to do. A lot of our students were looking forward to term 3 because that was the term where they were going to really kick it into high gear and get those passing grades. And we had just started our biggest unit of the year. We finally built all those great communities. We could trust them to sort of be really engaged. And so we were about to start our memoir unit. Had just divvied up all of the books, which is, no small feat when you're trying to balance who's reading what and who's in what group and how are we going to collect information. And then, and then the school shut down. And then we're still in the process now of trying to get these books back from students, and it was quite the kerfuffle when it happened. So
were you able?
Yeah, we're kind of gearing up for a really big, cool project, and then boom.
Right.
Sorry.
Were you able to do this project online? Was it transferable?
No. So unfortunately, we had to kind of abandon it. What we did was obviously we told the students who had the memoirs, we said, please do feel free to read them. And I did have a couple of good conversations with some of the students who were reading some of the memoirs.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to read most of them beforehand, so I was able to talk to them, and have sort of mini book clubs with them online. But no, we had to abandon the project.
That's unfortunate.
It was just too much.
So many things just kind of ended so abruptly. It's I think we're still just trying to get our minds around all that as well. That all the sporting events were canceled, the proms, the graduations, the projects, the school trips. I mean, it's been a real shaking of the foundation for education.
A lot of my absolutely. A lot of our students, of course, are involved in extracurriculars, and I think that's what hit them the hardest.
Mm-hmm.
They lost. They were planning this Europe trip through EF Tours. That was scrapped. We have this big musical that Philman puts on every year, and we just had a brand new drama teacher in, and so this was her first, big kick at the can, and she was super excited. The students were excited. That was scrapped. We have a very good music program. A lot of things, had to radically change in a hurry, right? And I think those first 2 weeks when we were hoping to get back in, it was kind of this weird limbo because we didn't really know what to do. And then, of course, once we found out that it was going to be long term, that's when things started to really, really change.
Right.
And not all for the worse. Some things actually, I think, there's a great opportunity in this time as well.
Oh, for sure. Talk to me a little bit about those first 2 weeks. Like, what was your school's? What did you do during those first 2 weeks when the ministry first shut everything down for 2 weeks? Was there planning that started to happen about, what are we going to do with the kids when they come back? Or what are we going to do if the kids just stay home until the end of the year? Like, what were those conversations that first couple weeks?
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation, as I'm sure you can remember, just sort of trying to, because no one really knew what was going to happen. A lot of the conversations, was surrounding what happens when the students come back. How are we going to do social distancing? Are we going to have smaller groups? And so we were really focused on, that face-to-face students being present in the school learning.
Right.
But as it quickly shifted to this new reality that we wouldn't be having them back in the school, then the conversation started moving to, well, how are we going to stay connected with the students. And at first, it wasn't even academics that we were worried about. We were worried more about the students, losing a connection with the school. And so our first conversations were about how do we maintain that connection? What apps are we going to use? How are we going to be online? How are we going to be available to them? And so that was sort of the first discussions. And then content kind of came a lot later because there were so many mixed messages from the ministry about what was going to happen, what was required. Was the school year over for everyone? Would there be an opportunity for students to do some work? Would teachers be required to take attendance? Like it was, there's, so many questions, and I don't think any of them are actually fully answered yet. So, that was kind of the first 2 weeks. It was a wild ride of just trying to get everyone back into school. Once that was scrapped, how do we stay connected? And that was kind of the big questions.
I really like hearing that too, because I think it really shows us what students are really motivated for at school, where their engagement really comes from. And it's these social avenues all the time, right? The plays, the sporting activities, the friends,
Absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit of that to the transfer? Like, how do you maintain that sociability, that engagement for kids wanting to come to be a part of a social part of school? How do you address that when you get online for the first times?
Oh, yeah. So that was the biggest challenge, I think, was to maintain that engagement. Interestingly, I had some of my students were writing articles and essays at the end as part of some of their mark improvement work that they were allowed to do. And every student, the common thread was, I've never been a big fan of school. I never really thought I liked it. But now that I can't go and see my friends every day, and even the teachers and the sort of the routine, they really missed it. And so our big challenge was how do we maintain engagement? So the way that we did it was we held weekly meetings through Zoom, through Teams. Some of the teachers used Teams. And then my big thing was that I used Instagram. That was my big way of kind of connecting with students. I already had a lot of my students follow me. I have a teacher Instagram account. And so I was able to sort of post daily stories, book recommendations. I made some YouTube videos on how to use our online reading app. Really try to kind of connect with them that way. And then really our weekly meetings became, there were some academics, but mostly it was just checking in. How are you guys doing? How are you feeling? What are your stress levels like? It really kind of shows you that schooling is so much more than just writing and reading as an English teacher. It's really about building those relationships and helping these young people kind of, figure out life. And that really became clear in this time.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting observations too, Jeremy. I'm seeing that more and more. And oftentimes I ask teachers, what do you remember about high school? And most of the time the teachers are going to social things. It's not the content or the formulas or the dates it's really about the lifelong friendships, communities that they've formed. And then it gets even a little bit trickier once you start to shift online, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. Because so much of your high school experience is the time in between the classes, right? Whether it's in the hallways with your friends or even just at those extracurriculars with your teachers, either sporting or dance or music or whatever it is. So to try to replace that with an online presence it's so hard because you're removing you're not removing the social aspect, but it complicates things greatly.
Right.
And it makes it more of a challenge for sure.
I'm curious about your Instagram, because I think that's such a brilliant idea because kids are using it, right? Kids do Instagram, so it's something that they're already comfortable with, that you're finding an avenue where you can fit into this sociability amongst themselves. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what was the reaction of the students when they had a place to meet with you kind of on their social media?
Yeah, so I've experimented with different social media apps. I briefly tried to use Twitter. I had a Mr. Wouda's Facebook page, but that was a nightmare. But I found Instagram works really well because I was able to create a public space for myself, create an alternative account, so it was not linked to me privately whatsoever, which was really nice. I was able to create a theme for the account, which in this case was that I do book reviews and I post my books that I read, and so I was able to share books that way. But the real powerful thing for me was the messaging on it. So I'm sure that as all teachers, right, we try to email our students, and students regard email as this like fourth option in terms of communication. So they don't check their email. But if I needed to contact someone, I could simply look through my follower list, find them, direct message them, and just say, hey, just checking in, how's it going? What are you reading, or whatever it is I was talking about, and they would reply within minutes, often within seconds, because obviously their phones are glued to them. So I found that to be a really great way to meet them. And among other things, I mean, I did all kinds of really cool stuff with Instagram over these COVID weeks, if you will.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because there's so many things out there, right? So many resources, so many online things. We just get links and links and links. Yeah. Like, what are some of your go-to resources that you have been using quite regularly online? What are some of those resources that you might suggest?
Yeah, so I mean, like I'm a parent too, right? So I have a kid. My son, he's in high school, grade 7, and he was being overwhelmed with links to different resources and apps. So I really try to keep it simple. So the teaching team and I, we created a Google Doc, and we just almost used it as a website, really, and linked everything from that doc. Created a weekly schedule, but the real thing that I used was through Instagram. I would use daily stories to show the students, this is what I'm expecting you to do today. If you're interested, obviously it was all optional. So whether let's say 1 week I was doing short stories, so I'd post a little short Instagram story saying, hey, here's the story. I put a little excerpt on it, try to tease them into reading it, and then say, okay, the link's in my bio. And then every day I just update the link in my bio on Instagram to a PDF version of that story online for them to read it. So they literally just have to click one button and they could read the story. And then we could have a conversation about it. I'd use the poll questions on Instagram just to see what people were thinking about the stories I was posting. I think my biggest success was I did a sitcom week. We talked about the codes and conventions of sitcoms. And I did a little bracket challenge. And pitted all these sitcoms against each other, and there was a lot of engagement with that, a lot of anger and passion about what should be the best sitcoms. So so Instagram was huge, and Google. I use Google Forms. And I'm sure going into the fall, I'll be using a lot more apps. I've used Flipgrid before. I'll probably use that more often. Probably some voice threads, things like that to deliver content. But I think for this time period, keeping it simple was so important, because these kids are being inundated with, if they have 6-7 teachers for different courses, they were getting all kinds of different stuff. So I was trying to keep it really like, here's the stuff. It'll never change. The link will never change. You'll always find your information here. And that seemed to work pretty well.
Great. So you also tutor online for Learn as well. So you're a teacher at a high school, but you also do this. I don't know where you find the time for all this, Jeremy, but some tutoring online as well. What are your strategies? What are your go-to, like, if I'm a new teacher coming online and I've never taught online before, what kind of advice or strategies would you share with that educator?
Yeah. So I think the big thing we have to really think about as online teachers, and this is something that I learned kind of the hard way, was that you're not going to get engagement unless you really start seeing the student as a real person. And I know that sounds like evident, right? Like, of course they're a real person, but this whole disconnect between screens, it really creates a barrier, right? I mean, we all know about how, people can go onto social media sites and say absolutely horrible things and defend it by saying, oh, it's not real, it's online. But that happens as an online teacher-student relationship as well. So some of the big things I suggest is, you have to make sure that you have at least your photo for people to see you as a real person. They can put a face to the voice. Try to use video as much as possible when you're chatting and talking. If you're teaching like a huge class, trying to break out into smaller groups so that you can have one-on-one FaceTime with these people is important.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously just meeting the students where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're using Instagram, message them through Instagram. If they would prefer that you only email them, just email them. Like, it's going to take some flexibility on your part to try to constantly to be in contact with them, but to meet them where they're at, because they're it's all new and scary for them too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think educators sometimes forget that as well, that the students are transitioning as well, right? This is all new to them as well, because teaching is not just online.
Absolutely.
But those are amazing strategies. Yeah. I love those.
Well, and
go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, like, I mean, we sometimes think that because the students are young that they're totally with it and they get they get technology, they get computers. But a lot of these students have not had any training with computers and technology on computers, so it's brand new for them, and it's hard for them to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the more that we can make it a comfortable, real experience, I think the better.
Right. And Jeremy, what's the flip side of that? So some great strategies that you presented and talked about. What are the greatest challenges of online teaching? Like, I love your answers because they're very simple and concise and they make a lot of sense. What's the flip side of that? Like, what do you think the greatest challenges are going to be for educators if come September we have to do online teaching again? What are those challenges that you think?
Yeah. Well, number one challenge will be engagement, and how do you get the student to be present, to be involved in the learning. Obviously, when you have them in the classroom, you can minimize distractions. You can say, hey, put away your phone. No, you can't talk to that person. No, you can't get up and wander around.
Right.
But when they're going to be learning from their homes, we have to create the content and the tools that will be so accessible and so engaging for them that they're going to want to buy in. That's going to be the huge challenge. Is just how do we get them to show up and to be present, to want to be there, to want to work. That's going to be the big thing. So I think, again, trying to make it as real as possible, as human as possible, is the go-to, because that's going to be our big challenge for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I like your ideas too, that even before we can get into any kind of content, establishing this connection with your students, right? I mean, even when when we're in class face to face, you got to build those relationships, right, with those kids, or they're going to be at an arm's length. Whereas if you build relationships and they trust you and all of that good stuff comes, then they'll be more willing to deal with the content part. But if you don't have that, and even more so now online, if you don't have that connection with those kids, it's going to be tough.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I learned through Learn Tutoring, right, where I've never seen these students face to face, never met them in real life, but I was able to eventually work with a few every week, was if you don't take the time every session to just sort of do a little quick check-in and say, you only have them for 30 minutes when you're doing Learn Tutoring, so you kind of want to get to the work, but you just do that quick check-in. And then I always try to gear everything I was working on with them to their interests. So I had one student who loved snowboarding. So everything we did was about snowboarding. We're going to write about it. If we're going to read, let's read about it. Let's talk about it. And it gives them that sort of that buy-in that, what I'm doing matters, and, it has value. We do that in the classroom. It's so easy to do it in a classroom. And I think if you kind of take those same philosophies and move them online, the students will buy in, because, again, like you said earlier, right? Students don't remember the individual assignments, but they do remember teachers, the ones that cared, the ones that built those relationships. And, that should be your goal, I think, whether you're online or face-to-face. That's my goal anyways.
Amen. I think you're spot on. I think you're really spot on, Jeremy, with that. And, wow. I just want to thank you for your words. I think that you've said a lot of great things that teachers will like to hear, and I think anxiety, because it is simple, right? It is about relationships, and if that's at the forefront of online learning, then I think we could have success and we can have learning take place. But it's going to be a transition getting there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think I've had conversations with all kinds of teachers at my school. Some are excited, some are worried, and I keep trying to phrase it. I said, guys, it's a great opportunity. Like, we are, yes, it's going to be tough, but we are finally almost forced to use the wonderful world of technology.
Mm-hmm.
And we've kind of been dragging our heels in that as a teaching profession. Like, let's embrace it. Let's use this opportunity to really make some cool things happen. So I'm worried, absolutely, but I'm very excited about September, and what this new year is going to look like.
Oh, for sure, for sure. But I like that excitement too, because change, you can't have progress without change, right? And I think pushing our system a
Absolutely.
little bit more towards a progressive learning style is really key. And like you said, now it's ripe for the picking right now, right? I mean, if there was
Yeah,
ever a time to change, now is the time.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, right. I mean, if you look at progress throughout human history, right? Like, it's often been when kind of terrible things happen, humanity kind of rises to the challenge and makes great leaps. And I think this is a pretty rough time for education, but I think we can rise to the challenge and make some pretty cool moves forward, as a teaching profession. So there are a lot of challenges for sure, but I'm mostly excited about what's going to happen in September.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, I want to just thank you again for spending a bit of time with me and having this great conversation. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that we were able to find the time. And I just want to wish you a great summer. Hopefully, you'll have a bit of time to just disconnect and forget about it all for a little bit before
Yeah.
August rolls back around and
Right.
it's showtime, as
Yeah,
we like
absolutely.
to say.
No, I appreciate you having me. I'm doing the online. Yeah, yeah. No, it's good. I'm looking forward to the break. I've got some. I think I'll be doing some online school with the summer school with Learn as
Right,
well. So
right.
can't take too much time off. That'd be ridiculous. So.
Right. Well, thanks and all the best to you. And I'm sure we will
Yeah,
continue this
thank you.
conversation in the new year.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Cheers, man.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.